Welcome back to another episode of the Solo Scaled Podcast. I am your host, Ken Freire, and today I am with Casey Watts, the founder of Casey Watts Coaching and Consulting. Casey, thanks for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ken. I'm excited to be here.
Yeah, Casey, I love interviewing entrepreneurs and their journey, and you've had a fascinating journey that we're going to get into. But before we jump into that, I want you to just share with everybody, what is it that you do in your coaching and consulting business?
Yeah, great question. I often like to share a story just to help people visualize what it is that I do and put them into the story. So, you know how you have that one closet in your house, or maybe it's a drawer that you have intentions to clean it, and you open up the door and you look inside, and a few different things might happen. You might take a look at all of the stuff and you decide, I don't even know where to start because there's just too much clutter. So you close the door and you walk away. Or you maybe are the person that pulls everything out and then you get started and you start to put things back in. And then you start to realize, wow, there's so much more than I anticipated. And again, I don't even know where to start. Maybe you stop and you decide you're going to come back to it the next day. And then you shove everything all back in because it's just too much. Or you could be the person who walks into the closet and you move things from one location to another, but you never make any real progress. And I find that happens in our organizations as well. We have leaders who are wanting to support their teams, they're wanting to align their people, and somehow they start to notice that there are all of these different teams who are on all of these different pages. And sometimes they don't know exactly where to start or how to begin to get people aligned so that they're excited about coming to team meetings or coming to faculty meetings or just coming to work in general, because there's just this lack of clarity about where to start and how to get people where you want them to head. It's very much the same as that cluttered closet. And so my goal is to help people really prioritize clarity so they can build their own capacity as a leader, but also build the capacity of the people in their organizations and ultimately create spaces where people want to show up. So that's what I do. My focus is clarity, and my tagline is clarity precedes capacity.
I love it. And I'm going to want to dig into that a little bit more here for these expert-led business owners. A lot of them are solopreneurs, coaches, and consultants, and they're overwhelmed. I mean, they probably feel the same clutter. They're like, I don't know where to begin. I have to do stuff for marketing, sales, operations, fulfillment. And they're like, I don't feel clear. So I want us to talk about that here in just a moment. But how did you get into this world of clarity precedes? What was it? The word clarity precedes
Capacity.
capacity. I was like, there's a word, I missed
Yeah.
it. Clarity precedes
Yeah.
capacity. How did you get involved with that?
It's really interesting. So I come from the education space, and that is primarily who I work with. And when I'm doing my speaking, consulting, or writing, my target audience is typically school leadership teams. And because I've been in education for so long, I've had lots of different roles, but in every one of those roles, I found myself kind of in this what I would call the intermundium space. So a person that's serving in between two different groups of people. So it could be that I was a mediator between teachers and administrators, or I was a mediator between departments. So I'm always finding myself in these in between spaces. And I think the thing that sparked this focus of building clarity in order to build capacity, it started when I was sitting in my office. I was an instructional specialist. And so my job was to support campus administrators and also support teachers in working toward like campus goals. And I'd had conversations with the administrator saying, we have these initiatives that we feel like we've been super clear about. We've set expectations. We've told people exactly what's expected of them. We have laid out this initiative, and still we have people who aren't getting on board, or they're still resistant, or they say that they don't understand what's going on. We don't know how to be any more clear. And then I would hear the opposite of that. So I'm sitting in my office. I've got teachers in my office. I'm asking them, so tell me about this initiative that your principals have shared with you. And they all look at each other and then they look at me, and one of them finally is brave enough to say, honestly, we never know what's going on. We have no idea what's going on. We don't know what our role is. And so that was like a catalyst moment where I was thinking, wow, we've got so many different narratives at play here. How do we bridge this gap among the adults? But then because I heard that and I started noticing the gap between the adults there, I started also noticing it as I was talking with friends about their organizations, or my husband would come home and he was talking about the gaps in communication between, his department and other departments, or between him and the higher ups who were making all of these decisions, but they weren't boots on the ground. So the decisions they were making really didn't make sense. And so from there, I just started to decide, how do we actually, like, if I am going to bridge these gaps, what does that look like? And that transitioned into, eventually, I developed a clarity cycle framework. And it's a framework that I take not only administrators through, but I take other entrepreneurs through it to help them gain clarity for themselves, but then also create clarity for the people that they're leading. And it's really all about the habits that you're building in order to lead a clarity driven life.
Okay, so you started to bring clarity to a lot of people's lives within their organizations. Talk to that expert led business owner that we were just talking about. They feel unclear. They're trying to do other things. Maybe they're like the coach who's like, I'm a life coach, a business coach, a productivity coach, and a yoga coach. Like they got this whole
Yeah,
list. They need clarity. So maybe walk us through your framework and how can you help
yeah,
them with your framework?
absolutely. Okay, so here's how the framework is laid out. And remember, it is habits. So when we look at this framework, it's the clarity cycle framework. There are 6 steps to it, but each of the steps is a habit that you're building, because we don't want to go through a framework and it be a one and done. Instead, we want to build each of those steps as habits so that we can engage with any one of those steps or habits at any point, depending on kind of where you are and what your struggles are, etc. So when I'm working with entrepreneurs, we look at this clarity cycle framework as the system for gaining clarity about our business. So we start with an area of focus. We decide, what is it? What's the problem that you're most struggling with? What do you feel like your area of focus needs to be? And I will go ahead and say too, when I take myself through the clarity cycle framework in my own business, I'm doing that at the first quarter. I'm revisiting it second quarter, third quarter, fourth quarter, and adjusting as necessary. So you can enter into it at any point. But we look at the area of focus. What's your area of focus for your business? What's the problem of practice? And then I take people through what's called a 10-5-5 protocol. And it's really getting down to the nitty gritty, like, what are the root causes for this problem? And of those causes, what's within your control? What's completely outside of your control? And what do you have some influence over? We take that list and we analyze it and narrow it down to just like 1 or 2 goals that fit underneath the area of focus. So now I've got goals for my business and it's underneath this umbrella of this focus. Once we have those goals, we start to think about the insight that we gain from our clientele. So here are my goals. Like, one of my goals might be, I'm trying to think about my own goals, and I have it listed somewhere, but I would have to dig to find it. But one of my goals might be, as an entrepreneur, I really want to focus on increasing my number of speaking engagements so that I can get on more stages and potentially gain more clients through those speaking engagements. So if that's one of your goals, then you're going to gain insight from your clientele. So you might reach out to clientele and say, hey, this is what my goal is. I have a few questions about your experience with me. That insight that you're gaining from them helps you to identify, what are the steps that I'm going to have to take to actually reach that goal? Maybe things that I need to do differently that I haven't done in the past with other clientele, or things that I might need to adjust based on what I hear from my previous clients. You might also be gaining insight by interviewing other entrepreneurs who are in the same space as you. You might gain insight by looking at social media and saying, what are the trends that I'm noticing that will inform how I start to reach my goals? And once you have all of that information, you then decide, how am I going to script critical moves? This is the important piece. Because I think so often as entrepreneurs, we're looking at, here's my area of focus, here are my goals. But then we sometimes stop there and we don't take that next really important step of scripting out, what are the critical moves I have to make in order to reach that goal? And truly listing out, and it could be you're listing out by quarter how you're going to reach that goal, or it could be you're listing out by month how you're going to reach that goal. So it really just depends on what your goal is, how you decide to script the critical moves. After you script your critical moves, you basically have a plan for reaching your goals. The next step is thinking, okay, how am I going to continuously gain feedback about my progress or measure my progress, and how am I going to celebrate that? And I don't know about you, Ken, but for me as an entrepreneur and probably someone who's a high achiever, it can be challenging for me to celebrate my progress. I'm always looking at, okay, what's next? What's next? What do I need to do different? It can be easy to lose sight of where are the celebrations, but it's so important to live in the gain instead of in the gaps. And so that's what that piece is all about. Let's think about how we're going to gain feedback. Let's celebrate systematically. And then the final step is, all right, we are looking at how we've made progress. What are my checkpoints along the way so I can calibrate and sustain that progress? If I don't have touch points for myself, and it could be I'm putting touch points on the calendar where I want to check in, or I'm thinking, okay, I want to be sure to reach out to my board of directors to check in with them across a period of time to share that progress, then it's going to be really hard for me to actually sustain progress and look back to see what are the gains that we've made. So that's, in a nutshell, the Clarity Cycle framework as it supports entrepreneurs.
Now, I'm going to put a shameless plug in here for you, but that was a master class. I loved it. I love the cycle. I'm walking through it, and people are like, "Oh my gosh, I got to redo this." You could either listen to this or just reach out to Casey, and she could walk you through the whole process. But
Absolutely.
I do have a question for you as you're thinking about this, because I'm listening to the steps, and one of the things I have found, I used to do a lot of productivity coaching in the past, and the struggle people always had was they could write the plan, they could make the plan, but they were hard at executing it
Yes.
and like making that progress of I'm going to keep doing this. So within your cycle, how do you help them to, one, see where they're not executing well enough, and two,
Mhm.
actually giving them that nudge and push that like you got to actually make moves here?
Yeah. Okay, so one of the things that I encourage people to do, and this is part of, so I talked about scripting critical moves. We've got all of those moves that you scripted. But then when you start to actually implement, you are we're looking at your, for me, and it could be different, like I said, for different entrepreneurs, but we're looking at each quarter, and then we're breaking down that quarter into each week. And then we're breaking down each week into what's happening each day. This is where I advocate that entrepreneurs have a physical planner. And I know for a lot of people, I was against physical planners for a long time. And I still live by like my Google Calendar, my notes. I've got all of the tabs open and everything to try to keep myself organized. But the physical planner, when you are scripting those critical moves and you're thinking about reaching those goals, there is something neurological about putting pen or pencil to paper and having something that you're writing down and holding yourself accountable to at the beginning of the quarter, at the beginning of the month, at the beginning of the week. So every week, I'm not only looking at, and I've got it right here. I mean, nobody, if you're listening, you can't see this, but I've got my planner. And on Friday, I'm going to sit down, and part of my routine for Friday is we're going to map out next week and we're going to map it out against my goals for this quarter and the critical moves that I said I was going to take in order to reach my goals. So that's one thing that I suggest. But the other thing is, if you're not a physical planner person, just you need to constantly have those your goals visible and your critical moves visible so that everything you are doing is prioritized under the umbrella of your area of focus and your goals. As you know, we can get lost in everything that social media or other entrepreneurs are throwing at us as you've got to be doing this. You've got to get on social media. You need this platform. You need that platform. Like there are just so many things that are thrown at you. You can get lost in that if you're not prioritizing your goals every week, every day. And, that can keep you, if you're doing that, it can keep you from overspending. It can keep you from burning out on things that aren't actually making you money and helping you prioritize those goals. So I don't know if that completely answers the question you were going for, but
Yeah.
those are some things that we work on.
No, and I think that's extremely helpful for those who feel overwhelmed, because what I have found in the past is they're overwhelmed primarily because there's almost too much information or too much to do. And what you're doing is breaking it down and saying, what do you need to focus on today? The language I used came from Michael Hyatt, primarily because I used to work for him, right? But like the daily big three, right? Or the weekly big three. So a similar concept. I'm curious, what planner do you recommend for people who would be like, I need a physical planner?
Yeah, I just started using, so this year. In previous years I've used Michael Hyatt planners. Um
Yeah.
but this year I transitioned to using a planner developed by Kelly Roach, and it's called the Kairos Unstoppable Planner, and it's built specifically for entrepreneurs. So
Yeah.
and of course there are a lot of pieces that you can use of this planner and pieces that you don't necessarily have to use. Like you have to make it work for yourself. But it has a section that allows you to start to develop goals and things like that. Again, when I'm starting to develop my goals for the year, I'm going through the clarity cycle framework first, and then I'm transitioning some of that or whatever pieces would fit into the planner in the beginning, just so I have something physical to go back and look at every week that I'm mapping out the next week.
Yeah, and with Michael Hyatt's, they're the full focus planners. I use those. Those are like I do a hybrid with it. With like I dump everything on my to do list in Asana, right? But then I'm looking during my weekly preview. I'm looking at, okay, what do I need to get done to reach my goals, and I'm using my physical planner.
Yeah.
So very similar when you were talking about Google Docs. I'm curious for you. One of the challenges I've had, and I've had to mold and reshape my whole productivity architecture. And I'm curious how it would fit with yours. Right now you're talking about quarterly, monthly, weekly. I have found as an entrepreneur, sometimes you are having to make big pivots on your goals because either the environment changes, circumstances change, or you're like, man, my offering's not working. So now I got to pivot that. Now I got to put more energy. I was trying webinars, that's not working. So how do you account for all the flux that you need to create as an entrepreneur within your goal achievement system?
Yeah. Okay. That's such a good question. And there are a couple of ways I think I can address that. But one of the things that is really important about your goals is that you, as an entrepreneur, we have to understand the importance of flexibility. So we live in an unknown market, like, right? Like every day is kind of unknown. We're leading one big experiment. And I think that's one of the things that I love about it is every day is a new experiment. Of course, you need to sustain that experiment for as long as you can to be able to see what's the data showing about this and what's working with it and what's not working. That's one of the benefits of having a physical planner is you can go back and physically see what is it that I've been working on and what have I been working consistently on and what have I not been working consistently on, because some of those things that you're thinking, well, this isn't working, may not be because it's not working. It may be because you're not approaching it appropriately. And so there could just need to be a little bit of a shift in how you're approaching it instead of making a shift to doing something different altogether, right? So I'm going to say first and foremost, if you don't have something physical to track your data or even a spreadsheet where you're tracking your data, definitely do that. Make that a priority. This is where I'm going to put a little, like, not plug, but an encouragement to people to have a CEO metric spreadsheet. I do
Yeah.
Finance Fridays. And on my Finance Fridays, I not only looking at finances and tracking that, but I'm also looking at, what are my podcast metrics? What are my analytics for my emails? What are my analytics for my website? So I'm looking at all of that and tracking that. If you don't have that, then you are going out making assumptions about what does and doesn't work without the actual data to support that. We need the data to support that, because you might find that the data actually is showing that what you're doing has the potential to work. You just may need to make some little tweaks. But your goals, when you think about your area of focus and those goals that you're working toward, as an entrepreneur, those goals still, they're not so specific that you can't make adjustments, right? Like, if my goal has to do with speaking and getting on more stages in order to increase revenue, then that allows me the flexibility to adjust how I'm going about that throughout the entire year. So those are just a couple of things that come to mind when you're talking about the flexibility of goals and making pivots. Like, we just have to expect to make pivots. And that's part of the excitement of being an entrepreneur, honestly.
Yeah, 100%. It's this fun roller coaster where, like, sometimes you're like, this is awesome. And then you're like, why did I do this?
Yeah.
But I love how you were talking about having a scorecard. Like, if you're not
Mhm.
tracking the metrics and like the key metrics for your business, man, you're going to miss out on so much, or you're going to think you're doing something well that's actually not working, or vice versa.
Yeah.
So having those metrics are super huge. I guess I want to pivot here a little bit, Casey, for particularly in your business, as you're throwing a lot of great productivity and clarity nuggets at us. How are you utilizing all this to grow your business? What's kind of been the thing that's working really well for you right now?
Yeah. Okay, so I'm going to go back to what we just said, because you were talking about there are things that you might be doing that aren't working right and you have to pivot. Some of those things you might really enjoy. For
Mm,
example, people have asked me before, like, what is your main purpose in doing the podcast? Like, is that a revenue stream? And it's not a revenue stream for me necessarily, but I enjoy the podcast so much. And because I enjoy it, then I want to start thinking, okay, how do I start to leverage this so that it does have an impact on my revenue or my profit, honestly, because I really want to think about profit. So, with that in mind, my primary source of revenue is speaking engagements. So, paid speaking
yeah.
engagements is top of the revenue streams. Then is consulting. The two go hand in hand, right? Like, when I'm doing consulting, I'm constantly pitching, like, hey, if you're looking for a keynote speaker for your next event, let me know. If this was a great session for you or a great consulting engagement and you found value, tell me about other events that you know of where someone's looking for a speaker. Same thing for speaking. I'm leveraging my keynote speaking for consulting engagements. And then there's the book. That's the third in my line of revenue streams. So I have a book written for educational leaders, and it's called The Craft of Clarity. So I'm utilizing that to as a credibility piece, but I'm also saying during my consulting engagements, like, if you don't have the book, now would be a great time to purchase it. Hey, do you want to purchase it for your team? Then I'm able to sell a bulk order of books. Same thing for speaking engagements. I'll come to the speaking engagement. Hey, one of the things that would be great is if you did a bulk order of books for all of the participants so they get a book when they leave. So all of those revenue streams, like, they go hand in hand. Now, I said I love doing the podcast. It's not a revenue stream. But here's what I'm able to do with the podcast. I'm able to interview people who could potentially know other people that have speaking engagements or people who are looking for a consultant. And I'm really intentional about when people come on the podcast. So I think about, are there event coordinators out there who are also experts who could come on my podcast and get to experience and know me? And in the introduction of my podcast, it talks about how I'm a keynote speaker. And at the end, it talks about how I'm a keynote speaker. So they're seeing that, they're experiencing me, and kind of building that know, like, trust factor, so that at the end of the podcast, when we're debriefing, I can say, hey, how can I support you as you move forward? Hopefully, eventually they will say, well, how can I support you? And I could say, I'm always looking for speaking engagements so I can share the message of the craft of clarity. So really, I'm using it as a relationship building tool and a networking tool. Plus, I just love to do the podcast.
Yeah. Well, in that case that you and I were talking about, you asked me the same thing similar right before recording. You're like, what's the purpose of your podcast? And it's a very similar thing. It's an engine of constantly building a network. What I have found, most people, they think about networking the wrong way. They're like, I have my pool of people, and hopefully those people will refer me. And it works, but man, it takes forever. And then it dries up. And now you need a new
Yes.
pool. And if you're like an introvert or you hate the like networking scene and trying to like go out there and introduce yourself, and you don't want to be like that gregarious, boisterous person, like, hey, look at me, and trying to pitch yourself all day, it
Yeah.
gets really awkward. So it's like, well, how do you grow deep connections, be really intimate, and also like be able to network properly? And that's why I found podcasting to be so effective, because now you're building
Absolutely.
your network all day long.
Yeah, for sure. Now, with that said, if it's something that your listeners are like, ugh, I would hate podcasting, don't do it. Don't force
Yeah.
yourself to do things that drain you. And that's one of the things that I would suggest for listeners. If you guys have not yet taken like a working genius assessment, that's a great place to start as an entrepreneur, because if you're looking at the working genius assessment, analyzes where you get the most fulfillment, like what type of work brings you fulfillment. And so the idea is everyone has 2 working geniuses, 2 working competencies, and 2 working frustrations. Well, if you're constantly doing things that bring you frustration, you're going to burn out really, really quickly. So we want to do as much as we can to stay within our working geniuses and do the work that brings us great fulfillment, but also that allows us, like, gives us enough energy to tackle those things that, we don't really like. So social media is that thing for me. I really, it drains me to think about, what am I going to post today? It's just not something that's natural for me. Um, and so I don't spend a whole lot of time on it, but the time that I do spend is super intentional. I try to just tie it back to those things that do bring me fulfillment.
Yeah. Do you repurpose your podcast for all of your social media content?
I do. So, and actually, I repurpose my podcast in a couple of different ways. So, I try to do 2 podcasts a week. One of those, typically, I have a guest, and then the other is just a solo episode. And whatever the content is for the solo episode, I'm repurposing that for social media, my email that goes out, my LinkedIn newsletter. And then sometimes, like a podcast episode will turn into a mastermind or a webinar, depending on how
Yeah.
people engage with it.
You do that for your solos. What about the guest interview ones?
The guest interview ones, usually I don't do a whole lot of repurposing with that. I am posting that on LinkedIn. Like, I'll get the clips from that because I do my podcast live. It's live streamed.
Okay.
And so it goes to YouTube, it goes to LinkedIn, and then I'll have clips from those to post on social media. But really and truly, I'm allowing the people that I interview to use those clips and the content however they would like.
Nice. That's awesome. Casey, I love the niche that you're in. I love everything that you're doing. I'm sure we could talk for hours on all things entrepreneurship, and then we'd look up and we're like, oh, we got work to do. But so I want to transition. We got our final segment is our expert-led business trend report. So I mentioned this to you, and those of you who have been listening, I'm trying to interview 110 entrepreneurs by the end of 2026. So I'm hustling. I'm making moves.
Yeah.
It's been fun. I've been learning a lot from you guys. But same 5 questions. Take about 20 seconds with each question. So question
Okay.
number 1, what's something in your business you're experimenting with right now?
The podcast is something I'm experimenting with, and
Okay.
looking at what are event coordinators that I can bring in to try to leverage that into potential speaking engagements.
Love it. Question number 2, which part of your business feels the most influx or keeps you up at night these days?
Managing clientele. I am
Mm,
still like right now, till probably within the week, I'm trying to land on one CRM platform that does a whole lot for me so that I can not only collect my potential leads and current clients, but track all of my work with them. Keeps me up.
okay.
It's tedious, and
I
I'm
have
not a tedious
I have
person.
managed I try not to talk a lot, but I have managed a lot of CRM, so maybe after this I could just kind of point you in
Okay.
the right direction or confirm whichever one you're landing on.
Yeah.
All right, question number 3. What's a goal you're building toward this year that you're really excited about?
This year, I'm attempting quarterly launches of the book. So I've written the book, and one of the things about writing books, just if you haven't written a book, keep this in mind. You don't market when the book publishes. You market before, you market it during your writing, you market it as it's published, and then you have to keep marketing it. And so I'm really
Yeah.
trying to be intentional about planning quarterly book launches. Both, I mean, some of them are really simple, and then some of them are a little bit more in depth. But yeah, I'm excited about that.
Okay. Question number 4. Where do you see the coaching consulting industry shifting and how are you preparing for it?
I'm actually excited about the shift that we're noticing because people want more human contact. They're eager for it, they're itching for it, and that's the piece that I love most. I don't love to do a whole lot of virtual trainings, and that's what people have looked for in the past. Now they're wanting to get people back in person. And so, because of that, I'm really trying to be mindful about stories and
Mm,
relatability. So what are the stories that I'm sharing? What are the feelings that I'm evoking? How am I empowering people in just our normal conversations so that they want to take that next step with me?
All right, last question. What's the legacy that you want to leave behind?
Ooh, such a tough question. I want people to feel empowered because they know how to gain clarity. And when people think about clarity and the idea of clarity, I want them to think, you know what? Casey Watts told me one time how I could gain clarity. That's the legacy I want to leave.
I love it. Casey, if people are listening to this and they're like, I really love what she brings to the table, I need clarity, I need help, what's the best way to reach out to you?
Yeah. So I'm going to leave you the two places to find me. That's going to be first LinkedIn. I am always on LinkedIn. I know I talked about social media, like social media, but LinkedIn is where I'll be. So you can find me on LinkedIn at Catch Up with Casey. And then you also can find me on my website, catchingupwithcasey.com.
Perfect. And I'll make sure those are all in the show notes. Casey, thank you so much for being in the show. And for all of you who are listening, if you really are struggling with clarity, if you're overwhelmed by your productivity systems right now and don't know where to go, I encourage you, reach out to Casey. Don't listen to this and be like, oh, I'll do that next week. That's the problem you're having. You keep punting things. The important decision is you go connect with Casey and just start getting your life back.
Awesome.